I'm Carmen Twillie Ambar, president of Oberlin College and Conservatory. Welcome to Running to the Noise, where I speak with all sorts of folks who are tackling our toughest problems and working to spark positive change around the world. Because here at Oberlin, we don't shy away from the challenging situations that threaten to divide us. We run towards them.
Hi, everyone. Andrea Simakis here, executive producer of Running to the Noise. As promised, this is part 2 of the conversation between our host, President Carmen Twillie Ambar and Benjamin Wittes, Oberlin alumnus, editor-in-chief of Lawfare, and senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution. If you haven't heard part 1, we encourage you to go back and give it a listen to hear the first part of their discussion before diving in. In this second half, they continue their honest and urgent exploration of the state of our democracy and the forces shaping it today. Without further ado, happy holidays, everyone, and enjoy part 2 of Running to the Noise.
We got to talk about the Justice Department, and the students and people who listen to this podcast will just be outraged. You've criticized the Justice Department, I think, writing that the ongoing abuses of the criminal process and targeting of political foes has become a part of their animating view of the world. And we see what's happening with Letitia James. We've seen what's happening with James Comey. I guess I'm wondering what you would say to us about how we need to think about the direction of the Justice Department at this moment. And I think for lots of people who I talk to, legitimate fears about a justice system now that seems to be willing to target political opponents, target people who have different political perspectives without regard to how we've thought about our political process and our prosecutorial process.
Or without regard to whether they actually did anything illegal.
That's right. It's just the sort of basic, as my dad would say, where are we on this?
Yeah, well, nowhere good. So this is a matter, unlike the Supreme Court, where I actually don't believe any of the justices of the United States Supreme Court are violating their oaths of office, in the sense that I think they all earnestly believe the things they're doing are the right things under the law to do. That is not true of the people at the Justice Department. They have repeatedly lied to federal courts. They are bringing cases that they are being advised by their professional staffs are unethical and inappropriate to bring.
Can you just stop for a moment, Ben, and help people understand? Because I'm not quite sure people who are not paying much attention have been reading some of the decisions from the district courts and lower courts where they're saying things like the government doesn't seem to be truthful. They're misleading the judge in the documents that they're submitting. Some of these district courts rulings have literally called out the government as saying, I mean, they've been nicer than I'm going to be, but y'all are lying.
Yeah, and some of them haven't been that much nicer than look, to people who've never marinated in the stew of the relationship between the federal governments and the federal courts, it is very hard to explain how extraordinary this is.
I think that's right.
So first of all, lawyers and all lawyers have obligations to the court. They are officers of the court. They have duties of candor to court. But secondly, government lawyers have some unique responsibilities because the government is the ultimate repeat litigant, right? These are lawyers who basically only practice in these courts. They bring dozens and dozens of cases a year. And for you to walk into a court representing the United States and lie is an extraordinary
Oh
thing
my
to
God.
do.
It makes me shudder. For those people who don't know, I practice in New York City, not in federal court very often, but certainly representing the city of New York and at the Corporation Counsel's office. And for those of us who, regularly in the court system before judges, this oath that you have as an officer of the court and the notion that you would show up with just lazy inaccuracies, it would be outrageous.
Right.
Let alone purposely showing up, misleading, and doing things that were absolutely false it just makes my skin crawl. It's so shocking.
Or what they're also doing in larger numbers is sending a lawyer, because the actual Justice Department lawyer who knows the situation can't make certain representations because they're false, would have to
Right.
lie. So then you shuffle that person off to the side, and then you bring on a new lawyer. You don't brief them on anything. They have no idea what they're doing, and you push them out in the hearing. And
Yeah.
so the judge can't really blame that lawyer because they're just a sacrificial lamb. There's been a lot of that. That's one level. A second level is mass firings of
Mm.
people with extraordinary experience and the just amount of institutional memory that has been lost, capability that has been lost. One prominent example of this is one reason that the administration is so flat-footed about dealing with Ghislaine Maxwell, the
Mm-hmm.
former Jeffrey Epstein crony,
Steam files.
is that they fired the woman who prosecuted her, and they fired the woman that prosecuted her because her last name is Comey. She's
Comey.
the daughter of Jim
Of
Comey.
James Comey.
There's dozens and dozens of people who have lost their job.
Or the folks who have, I consider them thoughtful and courageous, that just walked away
Correct.
because they weren't willing to carry the water for what they viewed as illegal prosecutions that weren't worthy of being filed and were in opposition.
That is a much larger number. The number of people who would be fired except that they retired or quit first. And then there's the FBI. I know there are probably many Oberlin students who will listen to this who do not find the FBI to be the most sympathetic organization in the world. And I appreciate that. And I just want to say that you ain't seen nothing in the FBI as reformed by 50 years of successive efforts by administrations of both parties to bring it under the rule of law, compared to what that same organization will be like if you start systematically firing the people who know what they're doing and who believe in rule of law, law enforcement, and intelligence under the rule of law, and you replace them with the people who do not. We are in for some very tough times with both the intelligence community, but particularly the domestic facing law
Mm,
enforcement components of that. And you've already seen that begin. That's going to get a lot worse. And in the meantime, there are a lot of people with really exquisite and important expertise in everything from art authentication, which is, something you got to know how to do if you're going to investigate money laundering, to, linguistic skills in relatively rarefied languages, people with very specialized skills with respect to human trafficking and organized crime groups from various parts of the world. And you've destroyed just an immense amount of capability. And you've also redeployed people with enormous capability on things like rounding up undocumented
yes.
migrants. And in DC, and I'm not making this up, there were some senior FBI agents who were giving tickets to fare evaders on the bus
Oh my
recently.
God.
There's a deployment of resources issue, but it's a really disastrous set of decisions for the institutional capacity, and it is all being done in order to terrorize certain individuals, ranging from pizza delivery guys who are being tackled on scooters to the former director of the FBI.
That's right. I have to say that there are lots of things that make me shudder about where we are writ large and on lots of issues in this country. The politicization of the Justice Department is pretty high up there. That is one that you just go, how do we get back from that?
Well, again, without a commitment to civic virtue, you got no chance. I would start with the idea that you need to have a presidential administration that doesn't aspire to use the justice publicly, aspire to
Right.
use the
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Justice Department.
Without stuttering, very clear and open and happy about it.
And
Right.
then here's the hard part. You need the opposition party to share that commitment. We did have this post-Nixon 50-year period in which There was no argument between Republicans and Democrats about whether the Justice Department should be used in an abusive fashion. Now, sometimes it was anyway,
Right.
right?
That's right.
There were plenty of abuses in that
But
period.
at least we ascribe to the notion generally across parties.
And when the abuses came out, there was bipartisan commitment to doing
Right.
something about them. So it wasn't, I don't mean to be romantic about this. There was a shared commitment to the idea of what the Justice Department should and shouldn't be doing. And that wasn't to say there weren't policy differences, particularly if you get into civil rights enforcement, looked very different under Republican administrations from under Democratic administrations. But if you said to any attorney general of the last 50 years, would you prosecute the president's political enemies because he hates them? The answer would be to look at you like you had grown a second
Of
head.
course, absolutely no would be the answer. It would be outraged that you would ask it.
Exactly. And now we deal with a situation where the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia will not do these things. The president summarily removes him because he won't prosecute Letitia James and James Comey and replaces him with somebody whose only qualification for the job is that she will without
Yeah.
having seen the evidence.
So, Ben, we've talked a little bit about the Justice Department and this sort of prosecuting of political enemies. James Comey, the former director of the FBI. I'm wondering if you could give the audience a sense of how you know him and maybe what you think the prospects are of his prosecution. Do you believe he'll be acquitted in this environment that has become so politicized?
In the history of the United States, there has never been a stronger motion for dismissal in any criminal case on the
Wow.
basis of vindictive prosecution than this one. And if it were to go to trial, I would be just stunned if any jury in Northern Virginia or anywhere else in the United States would convict on this record. So I every confidence that Jim Comey and Letitia James, by the way. You asked me about Jim because we're friends, but I don't know Letitia James, but she is not differently situated from him in this regard. So how do we know each other? Jim and I know each other because he was Deputy Attorney General when I was an editorial writer at the Washington Post, and he came over in that capacity to speak to us about a particular counterterrorism matter, and I was the principal editorial writer on
Hmm.
that set of matters. And so we ended up having a pretty protracted conversation, after which he asked if he could talk to me privately, which surprised me. But it turned out he wanted to thank me for some work that I had done on an innocence case in Richmond, Virginia, in which an air conditioning repair guy named Jeff Cox had been sentenced to, I don't know, 120 years in prison for a murder that he clearly did not commit.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had gotten a little bee in my bonnet about it. And the U.S. Attorney's Office that Jim had been working in Richmond had also gotten a bee in its bonnet about this case. I wrote a bunch of stuff about it for the Washington Post editorial page. And I was unaware, actually, that Jim was particularly
Involved in it or interested in it.
because he was sort of the head of that office. But he pulled me aside and just thanked me for caring about the case and for the work that I'd done on it. And that's how we know each other.
It's heartening to hear your view about what you think will happen with that case. The part that's so painful is watching what seems, at least to me, to be clear, kind of politically motivated prosecutions. It's not something that we are used to in this country, and I hope we never get used to it.
Could not agree more with that. It is one of the luxuries of the last eras that we have lived in. We can say things like a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, and we treat a grand jury as though it's not a real civil liberties protection. And that's because we have not seen governments that actually are systematically committed to political prosecutions and to the systematic violation of people's civil liberties. And once you have that,
Hmm.
it actually matters that the grand jury will not bring one of the three cases against Jim. And it matters that no prosecutor other than Lindsay Halligan is willing to walk in and ask for an indictment of James because there are rules about how you behave in front of a grand jury. We are seeing and going to see more the wisdom of a lot of civil liberties protections that we kind of thought had faded away and were no
Right.
longer of great use. And really, the reason it's no longer of great use is that we all thought we were past
That's
needing,
that. Yes.
and we're not.
But let me ask you, Ben, because you said something that stopped me for a moment. You said that the opposition party has to agree with these principles that we have come to value, which made me think that you were suggesting that the Democrats are not as committed to those principles as you would want them to
Oh,
be.
no,
It,
we
okay.
had 4 years of an administration that was it was a
Okay.
Democratic administration. So you ended up in a situation where if you voted for Kamala Harris, you were voting for the normal bipartisan understanding of what the Justice Department is.
Right. Normal course of business.
And
Right.
on the other side, you had no commitment to it at all. And so Donald Trump, to be fair to him, was completely candid that he was going to go after his political enemies. He wasn't lying about it. He wasn't hiding the ball. Um, and
I, this is great. When have we ever had a moment where we said, "Well, be completely fair to President Trump"? Like he was really clear
he was
about
really,
where.
he lies all the time, but he never lies about his emotional state.
I
And
love it. I love
and
it.
and he told you exactly what he was gonna do. On the one hand, you have a commitment to these pre-political commitments that
Right.
used to be entirely bipartisan, and on the other hand, you have a commitment to shredding them.
So it's the acquiescence of the party in power to Trump's perspective that is the real challenge. That we don't have bipartisan.
It is not enough to have a party in power that is respecting these norms. You have to have a party out of power also that says, yeah, we're going to change tax policy. We're going to change civil rights
Yes.
enforcement policy. We're going to go after blah, blah, blah. But of course, we share these pre political commitments. And that is one thing we have lost in a big way.
But I guess I want to make sure, because one of the hopeful things that we've discussed is your, I think, admonishment slash encouragement to the work of a citizen's, your civic and social commitment to what you believe this country should be and how you execute on that commitment. I sit here at Oberlin with lots of passionate Oberlin students who I believe at their core want to change the world for good. They want to meet the world as it is, so they're not naive about what the world is. And I'm wondering what you might say to that 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-old student at Oberlin about this admonishment of their role in committing to a type of citizen engagement that might result in a different outcome than we see at this moment.
The first thing is don't lose heart. America's been in worse situations. Even recently, I was born in 1969. 1968 was a really bad year. We have some political violence now. It's nothing compared to what
Right.
we had then. And we will go through rough times again. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, we like to focus, and rightly so, on all of the liberty that is being lost, all of the terrible things that are happening. But I want to stress you still have the right to go out and make your voice heard. And I've had some pretty difficult interactions with police recently, but nobody's stopping me from speaking. Nobody prevents me from doing some fairly flamboyant stuff to make my voice heard. And it's easy to let the fact that the space for political engagement is contracting make you think that there is no space at all. But there is. And I see every day a lot of people doing a lot of beautiful things that make a difference. Some of them are at the level of political organizing, and some of them are at the level of housing people who need homes. There are a lot of people in my neighborhood, this area of Washington, who are afraid to take their kids to school because
Hmm.
they're afraid of ICE. There are neighbors who pick people up at school and make sure that kids of undocumented migrants can get to school. And so the levels at which you can be helpful and be effective and be useful. By the way, putting on a dinosaur costume and dancing and wiggling a dinosaur butt in front of ICE turns out to be super effective.
Oh my gosh.
I would not have predicted that.
That's right.
And so the idea that my imagination is the limiting factor of what works turns out I love to flatter myself that it's all up here, but it's not. Like there's some idea that you're thinking of that may be the next big thing. The instinct to be intimidated out of being engaged is
Hmm.
one of the scariest things, and you need to get over that.
So perfect for me personally and for our students in particular. At the end of our podcast, we oftentimes ask what it means to run to the noise, giving the name of this podcast. What does it mean to you to run to the noise?
So it's such a wonderful name of a podcast. I was actually thinking about it this morning before we were talking. In many ways, over the last 30 years, I have lost touch with the most Oberlin sides of me. And in the
Mm.
last 2 or 3 years, I have gotten back in touch with my inner disruptive troublemaker. And I found that I had missed him quite a bit.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic.
The other day, I was down at the No Kings protest, and I was in back of these two Tyrannosauruses, inflatable Tyrannosauruses, and I did not feel like they weren't my people.
Oh, I love it.
There's a picture of me in my office briefing President Obama, and I hung in next to it a picture of me from my freshman year with my hair down to here, climbing out of the reflecting pool in front of the Capitol, which I had just waded across, dripping and with a big grin on my face. And there was a time when I separated those two people, and now I'm just like, they are one. We live in ridiculous times, and
That's right.
like, I would still walk into the reflecting pool, and I would want President Obama to know that.
I love it. I love it.
For many years, I was the model think tank scholar in Washington. I did not register to vote on the basis of a party in Washington because even though not being registered as a Democrat effectively deprives you of the right to vote, I didn't want to be associated with to have a political valence. I've never given a political contribution. I religiously stayed away from demonstrations. And my job was to give nonpartisan expertise and guidance to administrations and members of Congress and other policymakers, irrespective of party. And I still take that very seriously. And then one day, it stopped working for me
Hmm.
for two reasons. One was the whole premise of that way of being was that there were two great political movements in this country, one of the center right, one of the center left. Both were going to be in power at different times. Both were recognizably democratic actors in the small d sense, and
Mhm.
both would need assistance. And so my job was to be the assistance. And yeah, I would agree with one politician more than others about all kinds of things, but I just don't believe that anymore. Now there is one movement in the country is solidly democratic
Yeah.
in that
Pro-democracy
sense,
movement.
pro-democracy, and it, by the way, includes conservatives and includes
Mhm.
liberals. And there's another movement that is frankly authoritarian. And
Mm.
I never signed up to be nonpartisan between authoritarianism and democracy. That was not the game that
Yeah.
I have a big range of my tent covers a huge
Yeah, you
range
have
of
a
politics.
huge tent,
It
but
doesn't
authoritarianism
cover the
isn't.
authoritarians. And so once it occurred to me that that was the environment that we were living in, and that was in 2016, 2017, it started really breaking down my sense that I wasn't allowed to be politically involved. And so the second thing that happened was that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Mm.
And in a way that is an entirely different conversation, I came to care about that very deeply, partly because I mentor a bunch of Ukrainian, ranging from teenagers to
Hmm.
young adults and activists. And I've spent a lot of time with the Ukrainian community. And one day I was going by the Russian embassy, which is just a prominent building on Wisconsin Avenue. And I was driving by it and I saw it, and it's big and white and
Mm.
looks like a movie screen. And I tweeted that somebody needed to project a Ukrainian flag on that building.
Wow.
And they got a lot of retweets, and everybody seemed to think it was a good idea, and nobody did it. A few weeks later, it just occurred to me if someone was going to do this, it was going to be me. So I did. And I have been ever since then doing projection operations in support of mostly of Ukraine and in different parts of Washington and in 11 capitals around the world where there are Russian embassies that I don't think I'm going to get arrested for projecting on, although I've gotten close a few times.
Mm.
And done some other projection operations as well, including trying to get people to vote and including some non-projection operations involving things like planting sunflowers, which are a Ukrainian symbol in front of the
Right.
Russian embassy, things to taunt. And I have been increasingly doing stuff that is not directed at the Russian embassy, but is directed at the US government about Ukraine, since our policy has changed so much. I feel like my fundamental run to the noise instinct is back when I was an Oberlin student, the idea of not getting involved would have been unthinkable to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I let myself be convinced by the way Washington worked for
Works.
many years that it was better for me to make a point of being uninvolved. And I have learned to unlearn that. If people want to think less of my think tank scholarship, for that is fine. They're entitled
That's
to
right.
do that. But I am not interested in pretending anymore. Not that I was pretending, but I'm not interested in not being involved in both the domestic and international struggles of democratic polities against authoritarianism.
And if we take your admonition to be the truth, which I agree that it is, this is what is going to be required.
If I didn't think so, I would be doing something else. But
Yeah.
everybody's got to get a little bit out of their comfort zone. I don't believe in political violence. I
Right.
don't
Of
believe in,
course.
but I
Of
do think
course.
we all need to be thinking about what is the thing that I would admire somebody else for doing, but that I would never dream of doing. And then ask yourself, why is it that you would never dream of doing that? And for me, one of those things was being a flamboyant protester and drawing attention to something, not by something that I said about it, or
Right.
not by an analytical point, a more demonstrative exercise
Right.
of
Something
some
that I
kind.
did about it.
Exactly, or something that I did to dramatize it. I actually can't do anything about Russia in Ukraine, but I can do something to make the ambassadorial staff know that we in Washington, my community, judges them, and we want them to know that they are responsible. The other thing for me goes back to Thoreau and Emerson and has more modern articulators in Gandhi and Martin Luther King, that good men cannot obey the law too well. And there are
Mm.
things that you might want to do that don't have a negative moral valence, but are against the law. And
Yeah.
so the last time I did a projection operation, it was not against the Russian embassy, it was on the Washington Monument, and
Mm.
a large number of park police showed up, and they confiscated all my lights, and they confiscated my camera gear, and I'm not gonna pretend to be a victim of that. I walked in clear-eyed. If they charge me, I'm comfortable with being charged. If they don't give me my stuff back, I'll replace it. And I don't think everybody should be doing civil disobedience stuff because some people have more to lose than other people, and I'm very respectful of that.
Right.
I can live with a misdemeanor on my record for having done that. These are things that 7 years ago me would have never said,
Yeah.
and I think that's how I run to the noise.
I love it. I think that's so powerful. And I think we found a way to end in a hopeful note, Ben.
There you go.
That's it. That's as hopeful as we can get and powerful. Thanks for listening to Running to the Noise, a podcast produced by Oberlin College and Conservatory. Our music is composed by Professor of Jazz Guitar Bobby Ferraza and performed by the Oberlin Sonny Rollins Jazz Ensemble, a student group created through the support of the legendary jazz musician. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and share this episode online so Obies and other folks can find us too. I'm Carmen Twillie Ambar, and I'll be back soon with more great conversations from thought leaders on and off our campus.